Welcome to another House Planning Help Google Plus Hangout, and today our topic is all about whether you need renewables on your project. And so we're going to meet our panelists for today. Let's start. Cam, maybe you want to tell me a little bit about you.
I live in Canada, and I live off the electricity grid in a house that was built in 1888. We've been here about 16 years now, and we're almost at a stage where our house is zero carbon, so we've sort of been trying to decarbonize our lives as much as we can.
We'll definitely dig into that a little bit more in a moment, but Nigel, how about you? You're over here in the UK, backing up the UK support. We were hoping for an Australian panellist, and that may still happen if he can get into the hangout later on. But yeah, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh yeah, so I'm Nigel Banks. I'm Sustainability Director at quite a large company, Keepmoat. We're a billion turnover company. We do a lot of traditional house building for private sale, but very much at the low end of the market. But we're also a main contractor building some much more sustainable housing, largely for social housing and local authorities. And I've got a mechanical engineering, building services, building physics background. Been heavily involved in quite a lot of very low carbon, zero carbon, passive house projects as an engineer and as now working for a contractor building them. So seeing both sides of the fence.
And what about personally? Do you have a house that has renewables?
Yeah, I've got 4 kilowatts of PV on my roof and a wood-burning stove, but I'm on a gas boiler and I'm on the mains grid. So done a fair bit, but perhaps some of the discussion we have is whether it made sense to go off-grid or where we're on the grid connections here. For me, it made sense to be, and it's one of the solutions we found to work best, is a gas boiler and solar PV with a well-insulated fabric. So we've done a fair bit to our house. It's a 1930s house in the north of England in Leeds, but there's still more we could do. And I am looking to build a little garden office, a little passive house garden office. I've just started a little blog last week on that, inspired by your podcast.
Oh, good. That's what I like to hear. Well, Cam, I'm guessing as well, you've certainly got renewables, but was your starting point still about just making sure that the house was sorted and didn't demand much energy use in the first place?
Yes, that should always be the starting point in terms of using renewables. You know, it's the cheapest energy is the energy that you save. So we make sure that we have efficient light bulbs and efficient appliances, and as our system has grown over the years, we've been taking off items that would have a high thermal load, say an electric stove, an electric hot water tank. Those things, when you go off grid, traditionally people switch to propane. And what we have done is, as we progressed and added more solar for electricity, we've also added a solar domestic hot water heater. So we've sort of looked at the thermal loads as well, and we're now using a lot less propane than we used to. We use very little propane.
So are you quite remote? What was the driver for you to go off grid?
Oh, well, we were living in the city and wanted to drop out, basically. The house, which was built in 1888, is probably $200,000 from the nearest electricity pole. So at that point, the previous owners decided to make the investment in the equipment, and we were happy to sort of to pick up the ball and run with it. When we moved here, there wasn't a lot of information, so we've learned a lot. And I mean, the reality now is that the technology is so good, and solar PV photovoltaics are so cheap that it makes a lot of economic sense to do, which it never did for us. But we just wanted to prove to ourselves that we could do it.
Yeah, you see, this is an interesting point, isn't it? That some people would argue that you wouldn't want to go to perhaps passive house standard or a very, very thermally efficient house necessarily, and there might be a line where actually investing in renewables makes sense. Nigel, do you know more on that? I'm speaking vaguely here because I don't know the details, but there are arguments. I would always take that fabric first approach as far as it could go. But
oh yeah, I mean, there's clear diminishing returns. The more, I mean, you can go beyond the passive house standard, you can go down to 0.001 U values if you really wanted to. And what the company I used to work for as a consultant designed the Halley 6 base on Antarctica, and that had extremely low U values because there was a real need for comfort to do that. And I think there is a diminishing returns, and I think there is a point at which some renewables may make more economic sense. It may not make it may be better from a comfort point of view to go further on the fabric than you may make economic sense to do. And I think one of the issues that I've certainly found from one of our projects is making sure things work and continue to work. And one of the real issues I would say about anyone thinking about putting renewable energy on any project is making sure there's a feedback loop, so you know your renewables are working. The solar PV on my roof here was tripping out on a high voltage. We're quite near the main coal-fired power station here in Yorkshire, and therefore our grid voltage incoming is very high, and the inverter was tripping out. And unless I had a monitor which showed me that my PV was tripping out, I wouldn't have known, and I would have lost 20-30% of the generation as a result. So you've got to have some sort of mechanism to know your renewables, which are effectively mechanical or electrical bits of kit, are working. I've been to see some PV systems which have only got 1 kilowatt hour on the meter, and they were installed 15 years ago. So they were commissioned, turned on, and then turned off, and then never turned back on again.
Wow.
So you've got to make sure. Same with solar thermal. Make sure if you don't, how do you know your solar thermal pump's working? I think that it's really important that people, especially if you're doing it for people who aren't passionate about renewables. So a lot of the PV we put on is on traditional housing for sale or for social housing. And it's important that people get that feedback.
Yeah, because gadgets can go wrong, can't they? And do go wrong. That's, I suppose, one of the arguments, that if you invest heavily in the fabric, perhaps to the point that you have known renewables, but if you've done that, the building's doing all the hard work. So is it still really a priority as to where this balance is and whether you even consider renewables? Cam, what do you think on that?
Well, Michelle and I do a lot of workshops at the house. We have people come and discuss building houses and stuff with us all the time. I say, if you're close to the grid, you should on the grid, and you should use the grid as your battery bank. When I look at my house, I have a large battery bank. It's I have to monitor it. I have to keep my eye on it. And at this time of year, November, December, even though I have a wind turbine, I still have periods of where I have to run a gas generator or fossil fuel power generator. So people automatically hear you're off the grid and they say, oh, that's so great for the environment. The reality is most people move off the grid and onto propane. So they switch all their thermal loads or their heat loads onto propane. And somebody living in the city using electricity from a nuclear power plant, which I may not be a fan of, but technically is zero carbon, probably has a lower carbon footprint than most people that are living off grid with renewables. So I would suggest that yes, renewables are inexpensive, but when I look at what's involved with running the system well, and even though my generator could come on all transparently to me, I still keep my eye on it, but I still have to monitor my batteries. So I tell people, yes, put solars on your house. Start with, solar thermal for your domestic hot water, because that's the most efficient way to use the sun's energy. And then put on PV. But unless you really hate the electricity utility, which most people do, you should probably use that grid as your battery bank and put your excess electricity back into the grid and take it out when you need it.
Is there also an argument that when we use renewables, we should be really thinking about where they generate best, or at a home level there will always be a good solution? For example, perhaps let's say, Cam, if you didn't have the sun, there would be no point in using solar or anything that way. Is there always going to be a renewable that's suitable to your location?
I think so. I think what you'll find is most hardcore off-grid people will have a hybrid system with solar and wind, so that the months with the least amount of sun will tend to be windy months, and that works very well for me. And I think that if you look at a lot of places like Germany and that have such a high uptake in terms of solar, they don't have a super high amount of solar radiation coming into their country compared to other countries, but they're still doing a great job with it.
And looking at how you decided to, Nigel, for your house, was it just obvious what renewables you were going to go for, or?
Well, I mean, for me, I would currently not go for solar thermal and go for solar PV and maximise your roof area with solar PV. If you've got an extremely big roof and you can fit both technologies on, then it may make sense to do both. But certainly, there's now what a lot of people are putting on in their homes. If they've got a hot water cylinder, they're taking any excess PV generation in the summer and putting that through an immersion heater coil in the hot water cylinder, and effectively getting solar hot water from any excess power from their solar PVs for quite a simple about £100 bit of kit, which diverts the excess power into your tank. So for me, solar PV was the most obvious choice. Actually, when I was looking to buy a house, I was trying to find one with a reasonably big south-facing roof. One of the issues we do have in the UK is we don't have particularly big houses, and we don't have particularly big roofs, which are clear of chimneys and dormers and other things. So in an urban situation, it can be very difficult to get renewables on your house. A lot of the properties can only fit in the UK 4, 5, 6 solar PV panels, in which case solar thermal may make maybe a more sensible choice because you've got a smaller roof area, and solar thermal only needs a smaller area, a couple of square meters. And certainly there was a big push 10 years ago around urban wind turbines. I think everyone's seen that they clearly don't work in urban situations. Clearly, if Cam's in quite a rural location and he's got a nice hill and he can find a place for his turbine in an open space, it makes sense. But
there's that great one in London, isn't there, where I think it's south of the river, and this is only hearsay, this story, but it's right at the top of a big block of apartments, and apparently the top one is a penthouse, and the guy who owned the penthouse was complaining about the noise, which means that now it just doesn't function at all.
Yeah, there are issues with building mounted turbines. I know that there was a few that have come down. I was involved in one in Sheffield, which there's 3 turbines on top of college, and the college building's 9 stories, and it's on 15-meter towers on top of that. So the turbines are really high in the air actually, and actually work very well. But the structural vibrations coming back through the building have caused a lot of issues and caused a lot of noise. So yeah, building mounted wind has got a lot of challenges that need to be very, very carefully considered.
Okay, just thinking about a self-build project, someone who wants to build a house, at what stage do you start thinking about the renewables? Is it very early on, or is this something more towards the end?
For me,
Go ahead, Nigel.
Like I said, for me, I would say you need to certainly consider renewables, even if you're not going to install renewables from the start, and certainly in terms of your roof orientation. Most people looking to build, if you're looking to build to a passive house standard, will have an east-west axis with quite a large south-facing wall, which generally means a larger south-facing roof as well. So it can be advantageous to have make sure you've got a clear south-facing roof. Even if you don't put PV or solar thermal at the start, you've got the potential to add it in the future. And the other key technology to think about is what you're going to do for heat and heating your house and heating your hot water. So is that a gas boiler? Is that a heat pump? Is that a biomass boiler or wood burner? So you have got to make those decisions fairly early on, because they will have an impact on what heating system you use, what emitters you're going to use, etc. So it's worth having those thoughts in your mind, even if you're not wanting to go renewable at the start, because you may want to in the future.
And Cam, are you all sorted now with renewables? Would there be any extension, or if you came to replace something, would you change things?
No, we have almost 2.5 kilowatts worth of photovoltaic panels, and we have a 1 kilowatt wind turbine. So you know, we're at a stage where we're working really well. I mean, we can live on 5 kilowatt hours of electricity a day. The average family in the province of Ontario and Canada, where I live, uses about 35. But we're also at a stage now where on a good day I might make 17 or 18 kilowatt hours. So you know, I've sized my house for the worst months, and then when I get to the better months, I'm dumping excess electricity, and that's where, when we look at things like, when we moved off grid, we got rid of our waffle iron. Okay, well now we need another waffle iron because we've got all this electricity we have to use. So it's all good for us right now. It's working very well.
Now, do either of you have a question for each other? Just thought I'd throw that out there.
I'm interested in the energy storage technology, the batteries that you're using, Cam, and how big and how much and how many, and how long they last and how easy they are to charge, etc. Because I mean, I looked at buying a plot a few months ago, and I was considering using a car as being a battery charger, and I was interested in that technology.
Well, we have about $4,000 worth of lead acid batteries. They're big, honking, deep cycle lead acid batteries, and they come with the 10-year warranty. excuse me, if I treat them well, I should get 17 to 20 years out of them. But I would really suggest to you that they're the Achilles heels of somebody going off grid. I monitor the battery voltage, through my solar charger where the sun and wind come in. But the reality is they are still a chemical reaction. So I still periodically have to use a hydrometer and check the specific gravity on them. And if it's been a month with a lot of sun and I've been equalizing, I'll have burned off some of that electrolyte, and I have to put distilled water in. So again, that's why I would suggest to people that going off grid sounds great, but if I'm going to get 20 years out of those batteries and recoup that $4,000 or $5,000 investment, I really have to pay attention to them. And I think most people want to do that, and that's why I suggest if you're near the grid, use the grid, pump your excess electricity into the grid, especially if there's an incentive to do it. And just use the grid as your battery bank and avoid those hassles. I continue to monitor battery technology, and there still is nothing better than a deep cycle lead acid battery for what I'm doing. So there's no technological breakthrough. It's still sulfuric acid with a lead acid battery.
And actually, just on a bigger scale, there isn't that one of the issues that if, say, for example, we could go to entirely renewables, we'd still be using fossil fuels in their production. Am I right? Or some of the stages of their production?
Not well.
Yeah, no question. Go ahead, Nigel.
I was going to say, not necessarily. I mean, you can get, obviously, if you've got your wind turbine factory being powered by wind turbines in an ultimate world, then you've got that solution where you can create your renewables from renewable sources, and it will become a virtuous cycle. I think one of the interesting things to me is over the next 20, 30 years, it's clear, well, certainly by the end of the century, there's going to be a move to move entirely off fossil fuels to meet the climate change requirements. And there's a really interesting question there about in the UK, how do we heat all our houses and how do we generate all our power? So at the moment, almost probably 80-90% of houses in the UK are natural gas heated, and eventually we're going to have to move either to heat largely to heat pumps is the estimation. We're also going to need to move largely to electric vehicles. That's going to require a huge amount of electricity generation. As we move to renewables, there is still a big need for, certainly in the UK, better storage or better linking across Europe. And that's a real challenge, I think, that we've got to face. But for me, on a domestic scale, I know a lot of people in the Passivhaus community are quite almost anti-renewables, I'd say. For me, there is a place for them, particularly because it helps engage the general population in energy and thinking about energy. People who've got solar panels fitted on their house start to think about when they turn the washing machine on, when they wash their clothes, and it really starts to engage people much more in energy. And I think that's a really important sort of social and cultural thing.
And we've had that as well with fracking, the threat of that on our doorstep. And in one respect, of course, we don't want it here, but our energy does come from somewhere. So you could argue that having fracking on your doorstep might wake you up to the fact that we are using energy all the time, because it's so remote from us a lot of the time that we flick that switch and we don't know where that damage goes on from somewhere else in the world, do we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we have that problem in Canada. We have lots of natural gas, but a lot of it's sour gas or hydrogen sulfide. It's extremely dangerous and toxic to the people that live around us. But as long as it's somewhere else, that doesn't concern most people, because the natural gas companies tell us it's clean burning and it's better for the environment than coal. And there's a good magazine in North America called Home Power, and they had heard a lot of the criticism of the energy that's invested in the actual renewable energy infrastructure, and they did a fairly good study a while ago. And they basically, if you look at all the energy that goes into making a solar panel, the silicon and the aluminum frame, you recoup that energy within 3 years. And most solar panels that you buy right now will come with a 25 or 30-year warranty. All the solar panels that we shot out into space in the 1960s are still working, so there's no theoretical timeline on how long that solar panel is going to keep producing electricity. So I think it's worth the investment up front.
And Cam, I don't know whether you know about this area, but what happens once a solar panel gets to the end of its life, or anything, a wind turbine? Can the raw materials be used in something else afterwards, or is this renewable technology just turning into landfill at the end?
I've never heard of anybody having to do anything with a solar panel because all the ones that I know of are still working. When we bought this house in 18 years ago, there were some panels on it that were like sort of first generation. They're still working. They may not be working as efficiently as they used to. I guess what I would say is in my province, where 55% of the electricity comes from nuclear power, we still have no plans what to do with all the radioactive waste that's stored temporarily on site. And it seems to be no country on the planet has figured out how to store this waste. So to me, an old PV panel is not the issue here.
Yeah, with nuclear, you've just got that. It's the length of time that you've got this waste around. We're bad enough with normal waste, but with nuclear, you're talking hundreds of years, is it?
It's thousands.
I hear tens of thousands.
So yeah, but I mean, doesn't that seem to be the theme of humans, full stop, that we don't think very far ahead, do we? And I always feel as we move into this digital age, here we are chatting across borders, different countries, and more stuff is getting recorded. So people in the future will be looking back at even things like this potentially. And that's why I really want to do whatever I can now to try and reduce resources, move over to renewables. But yeah, I think we're recording all of this stupidity and living very lives of excess, really.
Well, absolutely.
No question.
Yeah, I think a lot of the technology is very mature technology. I think heat pumps, solar PV, wind technology, even the solar thermal technology, biomass boilers, it's generally technology's been around for 50 years. And I think one of the things for me going forward is there isn't a huge amount of new technology in terms of new bits of kit that are likely to impact on housing in the next 20 years. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the basic message was the thing that's going to change things is data, the ability to use data and engage and control equipment better. And I think we're at the point now where we've got, and also the ability to do things more cost effectively. And I think you've seen with solar PV, and you're starting to see with wind and other technologies, the costs have come down dramatically, and hopefully will continue to do so. I think what's really interesting in the UK, you're almost at grid parity at domestic scale on solar PV now, which is incredible. And I think you'll start to get to the point where that switch is starting to come now, where renewables become a more economic solution. I think more than half of the energy that was built last year was renewable worldwide. So we're certainly moving in that direction, and I think there is a role for it on a domestic scale.
And why is it coming down, the price of renewables?
So the price of PV has come down significantly, because the ability to manufacture and the scale of manufacture has gone up significantly, but also I think there has been some very artificially high panel pricing initially. Every time the tariff has come down, the panel price has come down in the UK, and we're starting to get down to a level where we're getting at the grid parity. I think there's a little bit more to come out of solar PV, probably not a huge amount more. On other technologies, it's gone from very small scale production to much bigger scale production, and I think that drives massive efficiencies and massive cost savings. So I think there's still a bit more to come out of it as it does become more wide scale. The other big difference is people are becoming more on the install side, becoming more used to dealing with technologies, more used to procuring better and getting hold of the equipment in more efficient ways, and therefore the add-on costs, the bolt-on costs, the risk costs are all starting to disappear out of contractors' quotes as they get more used to it, and that brings the price down.
Let's just round things off here. Perhaps if you've got some final thoughts, I'll take it back round to how we started this discussion. And we were thinking that if you're setting out to build a house, do you need renewable energy or of some description? I don't know how much that might be, but Cam, maybe you could share some thoughts.
Well, I would suggest that I wrote a book called During Challenging Times, and I basically said if you look at the challenges we're facing with climate change and peak energy and a lot of these things, I don't see any downside to investing in renewable energy. It's a hard asset. Unlike investing in a bank stock or an automobile stock, when I have solar panels on my roof, I know that my fridge is going to work, the lights are going to come on, and in a rural environment, I know I can pump water. So I strongly believe that investing in hard assets is the way to go. From an off-grid standpoint, you know, we're still at a stage where we live, like, we've always used the line, so we only do the laundry on sunny days, and most people who work a regular job want to do their laundry on Saturday morning, whether it's sunny or not. So I think there are some people who aren't probably ready to go to that extent to change their lifestyle, but it's certainly something that we're happy to do, and there's nothing more fulfilling than knowing my entire life is powered by the sun and wind. And you know, where we live, we run a CSA, we grow organic produce for 45 members, and it's pretty cool. We really feel we're living in harmony that we always hope to do.
David, have I seen you pop in here to the Hangout at last?
Yes, I'm trying to. We're having a few technical issues at my end.
Well, we're just coming towards the end, but it'd be nice to find out a couple of things about your situation. Are you someone who has renewables on your house?
Look, I've got a heat pump in my house. So I live very much in the inner city, so it makes renewables. It's only within the last.
And that's why I really want to do whatever I can now to try and. You must be listening to something on another channel there. So if you can shut down that window of your computer,
I'm just having
help it. You're going to get very confused.
Terrible technique.
Yes, so you were saying about you have a heat pump in the city, which sounds quite impressive. Are you able to like air source and living very lives of excess, really? I think he's getting confused. We might have to move away. Nigel, do you want to just round us off with a couple of thoughts as well?
Yeah, I think from the question of do you need renewables on your project, for me, you don't need renewables on your project. It may well be desirable or even economical to have renewables on your project. And I would certainly say make sure you deal with the fabric first and get the fabric absolutely as good as you can. But also then look at, if you haven't got the money to invest in renewables at the start, make sure you've got the ability to add renewables in the future. Have a roof which is south-facing, where you can get solar thermal or solar PV, which is clear and not shaded, and no other issues up there. And really think about your heating solution and make sure you've got a solution that's going to work long-term for yourself. And certainly if you're building to a very high fabric standard, a small heat pump or a biomass boiler wood burner may well be a good solution. One warning around sort of biomass back boilers is making sure you're willing to fuel and keep them fueled. And automatically fed biomass boilers is generally a much easier solution than solid fuel back boilers. And I think the technology is there to be able to do these things at scale now, and I think hopefully these sort of technologies will be much more widely adopted, even in standard traditional house building that we're starting to build for sale going forward.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for your time today. It's been absolutely fantastic to have another Google Plus Hangout, and I'm always learning whenever I do something like this. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.